I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Sabs podcast. My special guest tonight is Margaret Kimberley. She is the executive editor and senior columnist of the Black Agenda Report, and she is the author of Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Margaret, I want to start off by talking about Joe Biden going into 2024. So far, Joe Biden has not said whether or not he's going to run. They are predicting he'll make that announcement in April. We'll see. But I want to get your opinion about how you feel about Joe Biden having a primary challenge. And I ask this question because obviously, I think all of us know by now, Marianne Williamson has announced she's going to primary challenge Joe Biden. And I just heard recently that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is thinking about primary challenging Joe Biden as well. And I'm sure as the year goes on, more people may come forward. What is your take on this? Or do you even think that it's worth the time? And then I have a video announcement that I want to show as well.
Well, the problem with these Democratic primary challenges is it's the problem my late colleague, Bruce Dixon, at Black Agenda Report described with Bernie Sanders, and he called it sheepdogging. And ultimately, a lot of these people, regardless of what they say, at the end of the day, they are going to sheepdog progressives back into the Democratic Party fold. So that, to me, is the biggest problem. Who is, if anyone who's been discussed, who's really serious about pushing the system, about taking on the Democratic Party establishment, the Democratic wing of the oligarchy. We have an oligarchy in this country. I don't even want to argue with people about that. So in order to get the things we need and we want, we have to be willing to fight. And if you have people, it's a vanity project, or they're only going to be in it for a while, or whatever their rationale, if they're really not ready to challenge Biden and the Democratic Party, that's the biggest problem. And that's something that progressives need to, I think, be most mindful of as these various people throw their hats in the ring.
I agree. So there is a clip here from Case Study QB. Shout out to Case for this clip, where they're actually talking about other politicians, more so even some of the progressives, and where they stand in reference to whether or not they're going to support Joe Biden if he were to run again in 2024. So I just want to play this clip really quick.
Democrats are putting on a united front to support President Joe Biden for a likely re-election bid. Despite questions about his age and his approval ratings in the low 40s, House Democrats agreed they're sticking with Biden during their annual retreat last week in Baltimore. The gathering included both progressives and moderates, along with leadership and rank and file members. Biden is already the oldest president in history at the age of 80. And if he runs and wins re-election next year, he would be 86 at the end of his second term. The The president said he intends to run for that second term, but has not officially announced his candidacy. The official announcement is slated for the months ahead. Aides have been looking towards April, though there's some recent chatter that it may slip later into the year. For more on that, I'm joined by congressional reporter for The Hill, Michael Schnell. Michael, great to see you this morning. So you were talking to House Democrats who have made it clear that they are coalescing behind President Biden. And we're going to set aside Marianne Williamson. And at the moment, anyway, Biden seems to be unchallenged for the nomination. But dig a little deeper for us. How united are these Democrats really behind Biden? What are their concerns?
That's exactly right, Jonathan. House Democrats at their annual retreat in Baltimore last week, they met there in Baltimore, and there was one clear theme throughout that one of many clear themes throughout that three-day retreat was Biden 2024. House Democrats from all ends of their very diverse, politically diverse spectrum threw their support behind a Biden reelection campaign. And I'm talking about the center-left New Democratic Coalition, members of leadership, and also members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Chairwoman Pramila Jayapal, who I will note threw her support behind Bernie Sanders in the 2020 presidential primary. She said that she would like to see President Biden announce his campaign sooner rather than later.
Okay, so according to her, even the so-called progressives in Congress, they've all got on board and decided to support Joe Biden in 2024. So I'm thinking back to when Bernie Sanders ran in 2020 and 2016. There were some of those progressives that did support Bernie Sanders. Like she mentioned, Pramila Jayapal was one of them. Mm-hmm. But now even she has decided to support a corporate Democrat like Joe Biden. So my question is, if you do not have the support from the squad members or other so-called progressives in Congress, and you are challenging Joe Biden, or you say you're challenging him to his left, mm-hmm. Is it even worth it? And how, and more so, how are you going to win if even the DSA politicians are not going to back you and they're going to back Joe Biden?
Well, that all of that is true. You know, he's the incumbent. So someone like Jayapal may have supported Sanders before, but now we have a Democratic incumbent, and that just increases the pressure of this dynamic that we've been discussing. It's hard for them not to back the sitting president, not to mention the fact that they never opposed him. What did they oppose? What did progressives in Congress do? What have they gotten done? I mean, I remember this disgraceful episode where they wrote this mealy-mouthed letter about Ukraine, fence-straddling letter, and they wouldn't stand by it for 24 hours. They condemned themselves the next day. So that's an example of what they've done. Did we get Build Back Better? No, we didn't. Is the child tax credit gone? Yes, it is. All of these things that they claim to want, we don't have anymore. So at the end of the day, they all fold up like cheap lawn chairs. I'd like to develop a meme of lawn chairs folding up, because that's what the progressives are really like. And, you know, when I hear about the retreat, there were moderates and progressives. They're all moderates. They're all, you know, the two parties in this country, we have a far right party and a center right party. And rarely do you get members who are willing to speak up against their leadership. So I think you will see some pretend opposition, some fake opposition, but ultimately some will be more supportive, some will be less. And of course he's going to run again. Why are they even talking about it? Why would they be discussing supporting Biden or not if he's not going to win? Nobody walks away. I can't think of a president who didn't run for re-election. The last one in my lifetime was Lyndon Johnson when I was a kid in 1968. He's the last one. Ever since then, they all run for re-election. I don't think Biden is going to be any different, but that is not a good thing for this country. I think his administration is very dangerous. I think what they've done with Ukraine, I mean, let's be clear, they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And nobody challenges them, by the way. So I feel as though they can do very desperate and dangerous things, and nobody's going to take them on. So I would love it if Joe Biden rode off into the sunset, but he's not going to. We are going to go through this again. And we see them, I call them the Twitter warriors. Wouldn't it be great if you could put food on the table? Wouldn't it be great if you had something we have no intention of actually doing for you? And then they'll bring up Trump. It's Trump I feel like he's going to live forever, just as a way to shut people up. So that's what I think that we're going to have. Excuse me.
What do you think of this strategy of putting progressives in through the Democratic Party in general? This is something I'm sure you know that those of us at RBN are heavily against. We came from that Bernie Sanders movement. Some of us canvassed for Bernie Sanders. Some of us canvassed for members of the squad. I heavily supported Ayanna Pressley when she first ran. And I do feel like their rhetoric back then, when Trump was president, they were more bold, and I felt like they were more willing to fight back. But the moment that Joe Biden won, all of a sudden that they just became subdued, not willing to fight and push back against Joe Biden. What do you think of this strategy of putting progressives to the Democratic Party? Some people argue and say that it's worth it to at least get the message out. But then there are those of us that say, no, it's not worth it anymore. Stop taking money from working class people and let's try to do something different.
Yeah, I think we need to, if you look back in history, you will see that the greatest strides for the people were always made outside of the electoral system. So, for example, Biden, walks across the Edmund Pettus Bridge over the weekend. I'm sick of these people who don't care, using the civil rights movement as some kind of backdrop. I mean, what has he done to get the Voting Rights Act reenacted so that it's meaningful again? He hasn't done anything, but they use Black people. They use the civil rights movement as this high watermark. But the thing I think we need to remember about the civil rights movement is that people engaged in mass action, and they made demands that they knew the powerful did not want to meet, and they made them anyway. And that is what any gains that were made, the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, the EPA, Nixon created the EPA. Why? Because there was a huge environmental movement, and they actually targeted some Republicans for defeat. So this Republican conservative president is the one who started the EPA because he was forced to do it. And I think we have to stop thinking only in terms of electoral politics, because it's going to be everything that we've been talking about, this vicious circle of dashed hopes, and maybe this time is better. And well, actually, what about Trump? It's always going to be something, some reason why we can't have the things that we know we need, that we know that we want. So it's movement politics that has to be brought back, because that's what does it. That's when we get action. You have to have politicians who frankly are afraid of the people, and they're not afraid. Why should they be afraid of us? They've got no reason to be afraid. They don't do what we want, and we keep voting for them. So that is what we have to talk about doing. And it's not an easy thing. I don't even have all the answers, but we at least need to start with the questions or pointing out things that we have seen happen over and over again. We've got to build a mass movement, the kind that, I'm old enough to remember when those things happened. But that is clear. That's what we have to have, and not this quadrennial hoax. I feel like, the last thing I want to do is watch another U.S. presidential election. It's frankly depressing. It's depressing me already. It didn't even start yet. So that we must end the dependence on electoral politics and go back to movement politics.
Yes, you bring up a good point in reference to the civil rights movement, because I do hear people mention this a lot. And they compare it to electoral politics. But I think what's important for people to understand is that the civil rights movement was not done through electoral politics. It was done completely on the outside. And I think people have to understand that those actions that they had started locally, and then it spread. So it took some time, but they put in the work to get it there. I was talking to Claire Daly recently, and I did ask her, like, how are you able to get thousands of people out in the streets in Europe? 50,000 people in Denmark, 50,000 people in Germany protesting against NATO. And she said, well, the difference is the politicians that we have in the EU that people elect are also involved on the movements on the outside. And that's the piece that we're missing. Like, none of the politicians, like when you look at the squad members, Cori Bush came from the Ferguson activism. She came from that. But the moment she stepped foot in DC, it was just like, I don't want to deal with this. We had the marches, Medicare for All, 2 years ago in this country, 50 cities. And she came to the DC march. She was the only politician that showed up. But when she showed up, she said, we don't appreciate what you guys are doing here. Now, let's remember, they ran on Medicare for All. So it's like, it's nice that you came to the protest, to the rally, but you came there and you came there salty, just to push back at people and to say, we don't appreciate what you guys are doing. So it seems like to me, they get into DC, all the activism that they did before they were elected, it's just done. Or it's co-opted by the Democratic Party, and they're not involved in helping the movements on the outside. And I know that they would be a tremendous help to us. If we had squad members that came to those rallies, that came to anti-war rallies, we would have people out by the thousands and in the streets, but they won't even tweet about it. And so for me to hear someone like Bernie Sanders recently in an interview make excuses for Joe Biden, make excuses for NATO, and for giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, they have really lost the plot. And sometimes I wonder if this was the plan all along. Like, do you ever wonder that? Do you wonder, were they planning to not fight for us, or were they planning to fight for us? And then once they got in, they realized they weren't going to be able to push back on Democratic leadership.
I think if you're talking about individuals, I'm sure it's some of both. I'm sure there were people who were idealistic until they got to Washington and they, got their minds right and were pressured into changing. And then I think some of them are cynics, and they know that in certain districts you get elected by claiming to be a progressive. And that's how you win the seat, by claiming to be a progressive, whether you really are or not. What we don't have are people who are really revolutionary, who would not be afraid to lose. So yes, it's true. If you stood up publicly against the Democratic Party oligarchy, they would raise money and make sure you had a well-funded opponent. They would do that. But if you had the kind of movement that I see, that I imagine, somebody else would run. It would be okay if this or that person lost. There'd be someone in their place. There would be a movement that made them think twice before they tried to replace someone that was popular. You'd have a movement that would undo the impact of money. But without that, we get they're just fakers is all they are. And ultimately, it doesn't matter whether they were cynical or whether they were idealistic and they beat it out of them. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, they're not serving the people. They're not serving our needs. And it's especially sad for Black people to me, because Black politics now amounts to little more than keeping Republicans out of office. That's it. And we're, constantly intimidated. Well, you don't want Trump to win. You don't want so-and-so to win. We got to stop falling for that. So what do we have under Biden? He still owes everybody $600. Remember that? Yep. We were going to get 2,000, and it was like, well, you got 600 plus 1,400. So you kind of got to, your $2,000. The COVID programs are ending. Child tax credit, SNAP benefits. Some states undid the unemployment extension, and the Democrats did nothing to get people. I find it hard to believe they couldn't have figured out a way to get people their money directly, but they didn't care. And we're going to be in this situation as long as we keep following these people. I mean, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing but expecting a different result. And I would rather not be insane and keep doing the same things that, and we end up with Cori Bush. I mean, how insulting. She would have been better off not showing up. So she showed up and then put people on blast. I mean, really, that's what you get? So why would it be so horrible if she wasn't in Congress? Why would it be so horrible if Joe Biden wasn't the president? What do we have because he's president? We're on the brink of nuclear war. I have no faith in him and his team. I think they are all obsessive. They're all fanatics about doing things they can't do. And you notice they're now trying to start a war with China. So Ukraine blows up in their faces in their misguided effort to contain Russia. Now they're trying to contain China. They cannot undo China's economic prowess. They cannot. All they can do is, did you see this story about, they think, first it was a weather balloon, then it's TikTok, now it's a crane. They think cranes from China are spying on us. I mean, it's just insane. And they make up this story about, well, we think we have some confidence that we think that China might be considering giving weapons to Russia. They just made it up. And so these people are very dangerous. I find it hard to believe that we could be, how much worse off could we be with the Republican? I mean, look at this Buttigieg. What does he do? I mean, the Southwest Airlines meltdown over the holiday season, thousands of people stranded. They stranded their own flight crews with whatever it was that went wrong. And all he does is talk about what he can't do. He's the one person in the country who can do something about these airlines. The East Palestine, Ohio, the train derailment, the dangerous chemicals. He only showed up because Trump went. How did Trump go before he went? So, why would it be any worse? It's like Trump undid these regulations, but Biden didn't undo what Trump did, and he has the power to do it. So we have to stop being afraid. I guess that's the one thing I would say, and see the system for what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do. And when you see what it doesn't do, then I think you're less afraid to step outside of this box they try to put us in.
Agreed. Shama Sawant actually recently launched Workers Strike Back. I'm not sure if you heard about that, but this is an organization where she's trying to organize the workers nationally. So across the United States, one of their first main objectives is actually to unionize Amazon all across the U.S. And I think, that's something that I think Chris Smalls and the rest of them, ALU, could use some help with. Like, they can't just do it all by themselves. But I noticed something. So that launch was announced on Saturday, and that was also the same day that Marianne Williamson announced her run for presidency, although it came out a couple days before that, but she had her speech that Saturday. And I think what was really disappointing to me is that more people were focused on that instead of focusing on Shama Sawant's launch of Workers Strike Back. Even people who say they care about labor, they care about the workers, they haven't mentioned this at all. And it's very, I don't know if I want to say suspect, I'll just say odd. It's very odd to me, Margaret, because how can you say that you care about labor and you care about workers' rights, but here is this organization that's launching by someone who I think is very prominently known, even though she's a city councilor, and you don't even mention it. So what frustrated me is that everybody was talking about Marianne Williamson on Saturday. Meanwhile, Workers Strike Back gets kind of buried in the algorithm. And I feel like we need to be focusing on organizing the workers and helping people who are part of the working class. And I honestly just don't feel like trying to put our money and our resources into another political campaign. I don't feel like that is the answer, because the workers in the end still get screwed. And I want to get your opinion about that in reference to how we should organize.
Well, that goes back to what we're talking about, where people are fixated on electoral politics. So every time someone throws their hat in the ring, that's going to be the news story. And we also have corporate media that is a mouthpiece for the state. That's a mouthpiece, in this case, for the Biden administration. So they are not predisposed to even look for these stories and find out what else is going on, because that's not what their bosses want them to do. And so this fixation on electoral politics. So Marianne Williamson is the hot item on the news, and not that there's an effort to organize workers, to organize all the Amazon workers. The Amazon business model, it's horrific. People, they have more injuries than other warehouse workers. They don't want to keep them as workers. And in some places, they want to churn them out, like, in a fast food restaurant or something. In some places, they've run out of people to hire. They've done that to such a degree. So I think it's very important to help those folks. The Starbucks workers, they'll close the store if their workers vote to unionize. And we have to be thinking about and studying ways to fight back, and not to focus on Marianne Williamson, who's not going to be the Democratic Party nominee anyway, and who doesn't represent anything different that we've been talking about. So it's the dependence on electoral politics, a kind of celebrity culture, who's in the news, who's going to run, and not an emphasis on organizing working people, because working people are suffering. The minimum wage it's disgusting that it's so small. The fight for what is $15 an hour? If here in New York City, the minimum is $15 an hour. You can't rent an apartment with that. You have to have, I don't know how many roommates or a spouse who makes a whole lot more in order to survive on that kind of money. How are we not talking about that? How are we not making that our focus? And it's the drive to unionize, I think, that is a big part of what we should be working on in order to improve people's lives. But, you can't worry about Marianne Williamson or anybody else saying they're going to run against Joe Biden, and they're probably sheepdogs anyway, but nobody has made any effort to continue that success that, as you say, that Chris Smalls began with his union win here in New York.
Well said. I want to pivot to student loan debt cancellation, because this is a hot topic again. We tried to tell people a couple months ago, when Joe Biden announced that he was going to cancel $10,000 student loan debt and $20,000 for those who were Pell Grant recipients. I tried to tell people back then that, number one, he didn't do it the right way. And two, most of this money was going to go to the interest. And recently, Imani Oakley just put out a video on Twitter where she actually called the student loan organization, and they actually verified that yes, well, that money's going to be going to the interest. So you'll still have your balance. And these is just little things like this that are not mentioned to the American people. So you had a large amount of Gen Z voters come out and support Democrats during the midterms. Two reasons. One was student loan debt cancellation, and the other one was to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And then immediately when the midterm results were announced for that week, boom, struck down by a federal judge, which we had been warned that this could happen because it wasn't done the right way. He was supposed to do it through the Higher Education Act of 1965. He chose to do it through the HEROES Act. And here we are now with the Supreme Court. So it's in their hands, so to speak. What do you think is going to happen if the Supreme Court does not vote to uphold the student loan debt cancellation?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be surprised. What did Joe Biden say about student loan debt when he was running? Remember, he said something, it was terrible. It's like, I don't have any sympathy for young people, something along those lines. He didn't care. He said so. And he was pushed into this little step. He did all kinds of phony things right before the midterms, student loan debt, the pardons for marijuana possession, which, by the way, freed no one from jail. They haven't even put the pardon program into place so that people can get those few people whom it applies to can actually get the pardon. And they know, and that's the insidious thing. They know what people want. They know what people need. He was pushed into it. He was hoping that it would help them in the midterms. So, and it was 10, 20,000. I mean, I know for some people who may have gone to a trade school or something, that may have actually helped them. But if you got a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree, this is nothing for you. I mean, I know people who went to public colleges so it wouldn't cost so much. And there's still $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt. There's $1.9 trillion in debt, student loan debt. And so we have this president who told you he didn't care. So he would, come up with some gimmick before the midterms to fool you into thinking he was serious. And now, of course, and they know what's going to happen. He's not dumb. They know what the Supreme Court the conservative majority is going to do. So they're just going to point and say, well, what can we do? It's those conservatives in the Supreme Court, and help us get more Democrats in the Senate, because then we can get some judicial appointments and, something like that. So this is a classic example of the bait and switch that we have been subjected to, which I believe makes the case for putting electoral politics aside altogether. When you think back to those days that I'm talking about, the days of the liberation movement, the civil rights movement, people were in motion all over the country. I mean, thousands of, and it's a friend of mine used to say that Black people in the South got everybody the right to vote when they couldn't vote. But that's the power of that kind of action, and you are not going to get it in electoral politics. So, of course, this measly student loan debt relief isn't going to happen at all.
No. Do you think that'll be enough to wake up Democrat voters and to push them, so to speak, or to say, listen, I'm going to withhold my vote because you didn't fulfill your promise about student loan debt? Or do you think people will still just fall for it because of the fear mongering about Trump?
I still think the fear mongering will take hold. Trump is like this, it's like if he didn't exist, they would have to invent him. He's like this all-purpose boogeyman that they, and of course he's running again. So that even makes their job. I'm sure Democrats are happy that he's running again because they can keep using him to frighten people into acting against their own interests. I think we need some, old-fashioned political education in this country. I think we need history lessons. We need to remember what did work, what didn't work in the past, so that we're not just jerked around every 4 years by these people who are just dismissive of us, just disdainful of us, that they don't care. They know people are struggling and they just don't care, because they ultimately, they don't answer to us. They answer to the oligarchy. And as long as that's true, you can vote till you vote blue, no matter who, vote till you're blue in the face, and we will end up with the same results.
This is something I've been informing people about as well in reference to corporations. I remember very distinctively Bernie Sanders calling out certain billionaires. He would call out Jeff Bezos, he would call out Elon Musk, but I feel like those are the easy targets. We all know that they're super rich. Yeah. But I wouldn't hear Bernie Sanders call out BlackRock. I wouldn't hear him call out Larry Fink. And BlackRock owns the world. They own the media. They own so much. And I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why do you think there were certain people that I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, but certain people that he would not call out at all, and just calling out the obvious targets, so to speak?
Well, it's part of that celebrity culture. Those are people that everyone's heard of, So if you talk about, what did you say? The billionaires that's my Bernie impersonation, that people are familiar with. and not about the system. Bernie ultimately was a reformer. And I think he, does want some kind of reform. But what that means is you're not going to call out the ruling class. Let's call it what it is. BlackRock, by the way, they're in Ukraine. They're going to help the Ukrainian government, which I'm like, oh, really? So money's involved. So it's not about democracy for the poor Ukrainians. Anyway, but it's the system that's not going to allow it. They will not allow they will allow something tiny, I think the price of insulin is going down for people on Medicare, and I'm glad for them. But we still have a healthcare system in the hands of big corporations. That's the problem. And as long as we have these politicians who won't really call about the system, who aren't, as I said, aren't really revolutionary, we're going to see the same thing. I mean, look at what they did to Bernie. Even though he's just a reformer, a would-be, reformer, he was just not acceptable. I mean, look at the lengths they went to make sure he did not get the nomination, the way they cheated him in Iowa. The second time they cheated him. And he goes along and he would say, oh, I like Joe. I think he can. I was like, are you running against him or not? I think Joe can win. Oh, God. But so that's why they have nothing. Well, they fear even little changes. They feared having someone who might possibly energize people to demand some small changes. And they don't want that. They're like, y'all have to just live like dogs. That's what we've decided. And you may get a crumb every now and again, but the crumbs are going to be few and far between. And the Bernie Sanders of the world, ultimately they go along with that. And it doesn't matter if they want something different. I'm sure Bernie Sanders would like a different kind of country. I'm sure he would, but it doesn't really matter if he's not going to fight for it. And as far as electoral politics is concerned, we need somebody to run independently, not to run as a Democrat. That is something that would really could potentially upend the system. I'm a registered Green Party member, although New York State Legislature stole our ballot line. That's a whole other story. But we need to support people who aren't Democrats at all. We really have to go for broke, because this business of thinking your problems are solved because you got a Democrat in the White House. I remember the day, it was a few days after Election Day in 2020, when it was official, or the media said it was official, that Biden had enough electoral votes. And people were partying in the streets. Here in New York, it was, I was so annoyed I didn't even go outside. I'd never seen anything like it. And I was like, what were we partying? What were people doing? What was the big deal about having this man? If you looked at his career, you knew he didn't want to do anything for the people. He was always a conservative Democrat. But we've got to say no more. We have to say no more to these people, and even to some of the people who claim they're going to fight them, when we know they don't really mean it.
Well said. One thing I want to talk about really quickly is building an anti-war movement. So this is something that I have noticed when I look back in history and I look at the Vietnam War protests, thousands of people out in the streets. And I know there were two things that were different back then. There was the draft, so it affected more people. And then two, mainstream media actually showed civilian casualties in Vietnam on television, which I never saw in my lifetime with any of the wars that happened since I've been alive. So I think the American people have been shielded, so to speak, to see how many people are actually dying in these wars that are not fighting in these wars, including children. And then also, we don't have the draft. So when I was growing up, there were more people that were in the military. My dad was in the military. There was a whole community of military people. Now, I don't know anybody in the military. It's kind of hard to find someone that is attached to it, so to speak. But what I have noticed is that even trying to mobilize people just to come to anti-war rallies, which I'm going to show one of them in just a second, it's very difficult and very hard. I think a lot of Americans have been propagandized. They just believe what they hear on mainstream media in reference at least to this war between Russia and Ukraine. They're not even knowledgeable about some of the attacks that have happened in Syria. They're not aware of the drone strikes that have happened in Somalia. When I talk to them about Yemen, they don't even know these things are happening. It's like it's not even being covered on mainstream media. And so that's a big part of the problem. But how do you think we mobilize people to start an anti-war movement again in this country?
Well, it's funny what you said about the draft. I know some people on the left who say we should have a draft again, because as you point out, that would, everybody would have skin in the game. Everybody would be concerned. I don't think it would quite work that way. That's my first argument against it. But the other thing they've done since Iraq, there were huge, now it's about to be the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. That brought people out in the street. But if you take out the equation of Americans dying, fewer people care. So ever since Iraq, they have had proxy wars. They have used sanctions. They use old-fashioned coups and interfering. Look at what they did in Ukraine. They got Ukrainian fascists to take over the government there. They've gotten jihadists and to destroy Libya, tried to do the same thing to Syria, use Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. Now they're trying to use Taiwan as a proxy against China. So they know that the thing that people hate the most is the idea of Americans dying in some foreign land. So they make sure that doesn't happen anymore. And as you point out with the corporate media, there was a time when occasionally they would tell you something the state didn't want you to know. And you're right about Vietnam. They talked about Walter Cronkite and how people trusted him so much. And if he questioned Vietnam, then, that was a big problem for them. That doesn't happen now. The Pentagon Papers, Daniel Ellsberg's expose, that would not happen now. The New York Times and the Washington Post, they're not exposing anything the Biden administration doesn't want you to know. And their reporting on Ukraine is horrible. It's horrible. They have the week before the first anniversary New York Times editorial board. It was just Putin's evil. That's all you need to know. Russia's lying about everything. NATO only expanded because everybody was scared of Russia. And that's it. That's all. There's nothing else for you to know. It was dreadful. And that's the kind of so-called reporting that we get in corporate media. So people don't know enough. You really have to be interested, and it's a very dangerous thing, I think, that you have to be predisposed to want this information, to seek it out. And if you don't, then you're, maybe, I believe that most people probably don't want $100 billion to go to Ukraine. I think that's something you would not have to convince people of. It's something that, of course, because we have no representation in Congress, it's not anything anybody acts on. But I think most people say, why don't we have things in this country? Why didn't we get that extra $600? What about the student loan debt? All the things that we've talked about. If the average person had their way, Ukraine would not be getting any more money. I'm convinced of that. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, there's very limited understanding of what these wars mean, what they do to the whole the suffering they cause in the rest of the world, or even with the military, that we have this poverty draft. And you're right. There was a time when most men had been in the military, but that's a long time ago now. And it's something that doesn't touch people's lives. And now they've made sure that even that small group of people in the military are stateside, or maybe they're in a base in a foreign country, but they're not in danger on a battlefield somewhere. So we are up against it, but when there are these protests, we have to talk about them and promote them as much as we can, because there are people who they may appear to be uninterested, but if someone says to them, here's an opportunity to register your opposition, they will participate. Of course, that's why they don't give you that information, because they know that's true. So as difficult as it may be, I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace, and I'm a member of the United National Anti-War Coalition. I believe very, very strongly in organizing. You have to join an organization, and we are building, and we are getting people out there. And we have to talk about how to strategize to make these manifestations count, to move the needle, so to speak. But I think it's very, very important, and I support all of these efforts to register our opposition to what the U.S. does around the world.
And in reference to organizing, especially with something that's for anti-war, do you feel there should be red lines? And I ask because there was a rally recently, Rage Against the War Machine in DC. I was at the rally. I felt like Rachel Maddow's reporting of the rally was very off, way off. Of course, it's Rachel Maddow.
Yeah.
I do know that there were, some people who didn't feel comfortable going to that rally. I went to the rally. I had no problems. But do you feel there should be red lines? Because some people felt like they shouldn't go to a rally if there's going to be a speaker there that may be libertarian, or a speaker there that may be conservative, or a speaker that may have said concerning things about different communities, like LGBTQ communities and things like that. Where do you feel people should draw that line?
Well, to your point, people drew lines all over the place. I did not participate. The organizations I just mentioned didn't participate, but we weren't asked to as well. I think, but there were people I respect who did participate, and I still respect them. I'm not planning to fall out with anybody because they went to or spoke at Rage Against the War Machine. But I think what this points out is we have to build the movement. And the fact that there could be a credible march for example, libertarians. So yes, they are opposed to a lot of military spending. Yes, they are. But they're also opposed to government spending in general. So a lot of the things we've talked about, they're not in favor of. So I think we have to ask ourselves after this event is over, are these people you can work with? Are these organizations you can work with? Do you have the same ideology? And you have to ask yourselves, well, how do libertarians move the needle in the anti-war movement? And I think some of the arguments were, I think, not accurate. So, for example, we were told, well, if you want to reach working class white people, you have to have conservatives involved. Well, first of all, who says working class white people are all right wing? I don't think that's true. So I think that you have to stop and examine some of the suppositions being made that allowed this to move forward. I remember when I first heard about it, I just hadn't heard there were some individuals speaking. Am I frozen? I think I froze again. Okay, cool. There were some individuals speak. I just had not heard of these organizations. I hadn't heard of some of the people, which does not mean it's something not to join with. But I think I fall more on the side of having those lines and making sure that we build the left, that we build the anti-war left, that we build anti-imperialism. I think that should be our emphasis, rather than getting sidetracked by who's at this rally, who's at that rally, Can we be with those people? I have to say that, if you're going to, if not change your own politics, but coalesce with people who have very different politics, it's got to be for a better reason than a specious argument about working class people being libertarians. I'm not even sure that that's the case. But I think one of the problems, it was clear to me that the organizers did not know how to organize. I mean, I think they made some mistakes that were caused by the fact that they don't have these relationships. Like they invited individuals, some individuals who they knew might draw a bigger crowd, but they did not reach out to some of the groups I've mentioned and others. So that you can have a real movement that's actually going to accomplish something. So having said all of those things, I believe we've got to work with people who are on board with ending these wars, stop stealing our money to go overseas, to use it for human needs here. So that's why, for me, I can't, if someone says, oh, I'm against $100 billion going to Ukraine, but I also think we don't need Medicare for all, that for me is not going to work. I'm not going to hate that person or hate anybody who did participate. But I think the lesson to take from all of this is to build amongst ourselves. We've got to build. And then I believe we'll be less likely to have these fights that are not productive, that don't go anywhere, because I don't know how many people were reached. I mean, and how do you determine a successful protest? Is it the number of people? That can be part of it. But did you get people who weren't involved before? Do you have a strategy for how to approach elected officials? Do you have a strategy for dealing with the media? Do you have a strategy for educating people? I mean, these are very big questions, and I'm not saying people have to have all of them answered in order to take any action, but I want us to be focused on a bigger picture. And I think if we do that, we will go a long way towards building the movement against these wars.
I think for me, some of the things that I've seen been in organizing spaces, I've seen this with every event. I think this is the thing, like when we did the marches for Medicare for All, that event was heavily smeared. Some people didn't like that some of the speakers were conservative. There was a conservative speaker who was a doctor who agreed with Medicare for All, didn't agree with other issues that we push for on the left, but he said Medicare for All is a no-brainer and we should have it in this country. So that's an event that was heavily smeared. I've seen the Julian Assange event was also smeared. And it's just like, it seems like to me, sometimes it kind of comes across as, and I totally understand if someone tells me like, that's not for me, I don't feel comfortable coming to that, that's their right and their decision. But I think it becomes a little bit strange when I see people online trying to smear an event and tell people, don't go, don't go, don't go. Then it just kind of seems like, okay, what's your angle here? And I saw that with like multiple events that I've been a part of. I think when I look at like an anti-war movement and I'm looking at getting numbers out and people out in the streets, the 50,000 people that show up in Denmark and that show up in Germany, they're not all on the left, but they're all against this war and they're all upset with NATO. So I think that's something we have to ask. Like, even if we look back at the Vietnam protests that happened back then, was every protester like out on the streets? Were they all like on the left? I don't think so. So I think I get where you're coming from. For me, I kind of, when I'm looking at organizing, I organize with people around the issues. And then I know there's certain people that I can work with on certain issues. So like the George Floyd protest, for example, I know what groups to go to for that. I knew where to go. Even some of those people didn't agree with me on Medicare for all. They were not for that at all. In fact, a lot of them were liberals. They were just like, we do not want government-run healthcare. When I looked at the Julian Assange event, I organized with people that are passionate about against censorship and for free press. So I know where to go with. And I think that's the thing for me, is that I've never been able to find one particular group that agrees with me on every single issue when it comes to organizing.
I think, one of the problems that I think you're pointing out, there's a lot of people who are just unserious to spend time online worrying about what somebody else chose to do, or making up a specious argument. That's not where I put my efforts. I'll put it that way. The problem with somebody like Julian Assange is the propaganda has worked. I mean, it's terrible what the lies they told about him. It's like, well, Trump won because of Julian Assange. Not that Trump got $4 billion, the equivalent of $4 billion in free advertising from corporate media. But it's Julian Assange, and he, the Russians gave him something. And in fact, somebody leaked something to him. It's a longer story. But that lack of information, that plays a role when we try to move, that people will bring in all kinds of irrelevancies. But, I would say in general, you have to, I believe it's important to have an ideology behind what we do. So if someone is I don't know who this person was who spoke at the Medicare for All rally.
Dr. Joseph Jarvis.
Okay, I don't know the name, sorry, but if the point should be that this is a public good. Healthcare is a public good. It should be a right. So it seems to me that if you're asserting that healthcare should be a right, it should be in public hands, as it is all over the world. And it should not be in private hands. It should be not just Medicare for all, but it should be run by us. And I think when you say something as an example, when you say that, but you have to reach that point. It's not just about how much a particular person spends on their health care. And that can be, and that is a heavier lift to get people to think beyond that, because we're trained in this country, we're, encouraged to believe in irrelevancies and in a lot of foolishness. So it can be difficult. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I think when you have that ideology that you hold on to, I think you're less likely to get tripped up by this. So I'm not just personally, I'm not just against the proxy war in Ukraine. If it were up to me, the defense budget would be cut in half. The U.S. would not be interfering in the affairs of other nations. That money that would be cut from the defense budget would be used for us, because we would have healthcare as a right. We would have housing as a right. We wouldn't have homeless encampments everywhere. And when you organize around those principles, and when you have those strong principles, I think it's a lot less likely that you'll be tripped up by some of the things that happened, especially with that particular event. And it can be okay that everybody's not at the same thing. I don't think we should be afraid of that. It's like, listen, if libertarians want to campaign against the military budget that we have at it, go for it. But then, of course, when we talk about what that money should be used for, and that is the problem, that is the elephant in the room that can't be ignored, because on some issues, they are, we're going to be opposed to each other.
You should talk to Larry Sharpe about this, Margaret. Have you spoken to him before?
No.
Larry Sharpe, he's in New York with you. He was trying to run as governor of New York. As a libertarian, he was about to get on the ballot, then they prevented him from being on the ballot. It's the whole thing that went into that. But Larry Sharpe, he brought us on from RBN, and that was a wild time. But but we agree with him on some issues, and then other issues we were like, no, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, the New York State legislature kicked the libertarians. They lost their ballot line the same way the Greens did. Basically, they lifted the threshold a lot. To get signatures, to get a certain percentage of the vote in order to have a ballot line. And for the first time in my lifetime, only Democrats and Republicans are on the ballot in New York State. They have the Working Families Party, though, as Democrats. I don't consider them a different party, but the Greens had a ballot line, Libertarians had a ballot line. There were a couple other small parties, but the oligarchy in New York State did us all in.
Oh boy. Well, Margaret, I want to be respectful of your time. I just want to shout this out really quick because there is another rally that's coming up in DC. It's called Peace in Ukraine. Join Peace in Ukraine rallies nationwide. That is March 18th through the 19th, DC at the White House. So that'll be at 1 p.m. Code Pink is sponsoring this along with Answer Coalition and the People's Forum.
Yeah. And we have Black Alliance for Peace is endorsing, UNAC's endorsing. I think Vets for Peace are endorsing. It's a big coalition. It's a very big coalition. I don't know if you're going to be there, but I'm going to be there. And I'm looking for, it's been a while since with COVID, it felt like everything, sort of stopped, but I am going to get on a bus and get down to Washington. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Awesome. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, that was Miss Margaret Kimberley. Always great to talk to her. I'm going to go to some of the comments here. I think there's a couple comments on Rockfin as well, and then we'll get into the other news stories. Got some pretty interesting stories tonight. So Brent says, I love Margaret's tone of impatience with useless strategies. Yes, yes. What's going on? Casey says, hashtag workers strike back. Thank you so much for the super chat, Jonas. Great interview, questions, and discussion. Thank you so much, Jonas. And Pachico says, Sabby's discussions with Margaret are always excellent. Thanks, y'all. Thank you so much. And my hair is doing a something here. What is happening here? It's like fluffy. It's like fluffy and puffy. I don't know what happened. I give up. I give up. I can't. I'm not doing this with you today. Just talking to my hair. Anywho, I'll take the comments on Rockfin. Yeah. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Laura Baza. And thank you for the tip, Stargazer. Margaret's book, Prejudential, is great. Yes, that's another book that you guys should check out. I think that came out last year. I saw on someone's show talking about it last year. Okie doke. What are we going to discuss tonight? We have 3 stories to cover. We are going to do call in tonight. So let's go ahead and share that beautiful thumbnail there. Tonight, we are discussing Richard Wolff and Aaron Mate vent. I ran out of character limit there when I was doing this. So I ended up just saying vent. I was going to say vent about the media or media vent, and I ran out of limits there. And I ran out of limits with the actual title because there is like a character limit. So that's what they're venting about. They are venting about the media. So we're going to talk about that. Margaret Kimberley obviously was just here. We're also going to discuss Syria struggles. We're going to talk about what just happened in Syria in reference to that earthquake and also in reference to the sanctions that just came up in Congress. We're going to talk about that vote and how things transpired there. And we're also going to discuss SNAP decrease. Now, this one is really huge, especially for any of you that are receiving SNAP benefits. We need to talk about what is going to happen with that very soon. Actually, that's coming just around the corner. I want to give a quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate your help. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. Thank you. I'm laughing at the chat. I just saw a comment from Damon. You can see all of their names mentioned, listed here. And you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there. Thank you guys so much for your support. Thank you, Damon. I really do appreciate that comment because I'm not feeling it. Damon says, your hair is banging, Sabby. You're so sweet. You're too kind. Too kind. Okay, let's get started with this story about Syria. Now, for those of you who are not aware, there was an earthquake in Syria and Turkey. And Syria, like before this earthquake, they were already under tremendous despair, I would say, so to speak. They already had sanctions put on them by the US government. I'm going to get into that in just a second. But people are starving in Syria. This is serious. A lot of people don't talk about it. A lot of people don't even know. When I leave this bubble, this independent media bubble, and I talk to everyday peeps who are not in this space, most of them don't even understand what is happening to people in Syria. So I want to start off with discussing the earthquake first, and then we're going to get into the issue about the sanctions and how there was actually an opportunity just recently for the US government to lift the sanctions on Syria, and they decided not to. So let's go ahead and get into this clip here. Here we go.
Exactly a month after the devastating earthquakes, which killed more than 50,000 people across Turkey and Syria, many are still coping with the crisis and a lack of proper shelter on an unprecedented scale. The United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, estimates that in Turkey alone, at least 1.5 million people are still inside the disaster zone with nowhere to live. The true figure could, of course, be even higher. Well, our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster is in Antakya for us. And Anna, one can only imagine the devastation that people are still struggling to cope with.
That's right, Geeta. I think one thing that's notable today, a month on from those first quakes, is how little has physically changed. You still see so many buildings like this one. This was one of the new buildings that should never have collapsed. They should have stayed up because they should have been built in a way that made them able to withstand earthquakes. But nothing has changed here, and nothing will for a long time. What is slightly different, and you'll see the backs of these containers that people will soon be living in, but the problem is at the moment they're not. All of this is taking a really long time to put into place. It's quite a slow process, and in fact even through there you'll see tents. Many people here living in tents, some outside their homes, some of them in larger tented areas, and even further away you can see another place that's become a home for people, the railway station.
These trains haven't left the station for a month. They're homes instead now to earthquake survivors. Yilmaz and 5 of his family live in this carriage. They sleep on the seats, the few possessions they have around them.
They wanted to provide tents to us, but I refused. Tents are cold, and this place has a notoriously strong wind. Yarıkaya they call it. When it blows, all the tents will end up on the sea.
AFAD, the Turkish disaster management agency, says around 2 million people have left the quake zone altogether. 1.5 million more are still here and struggling. There's anger too that so many buildings were allowed to have design features that struggle to withstand an earthquake. More than 160,000 either collapsed or were badly damaged. And it wasn't just the old ones.
This is a well-to-do area, it's close to the park, and there are lots of modern buildings. All of them should have stayed up. But look, this one is so new that you can still see the stickers in the glass on the top floor. Nobody had even moved in there yet, and yet it is still toppled to the ground.
The scale of the task ahead is enormous. There isn't enough mechanical equipment in the country to clear the rubble quickly. So places like Iskenderun's collapsed hospital wing stay as they are. Personal medical notes litter the ruins. There are smashed pieces of equipment and medicines lying on the floor.
And you'll see images like this in Yemen as well. Now with Yemen, obviously it was due to, drone strikes, etc. But you'll see people just living in the rubble because they don't have enough equipment to actually clear the rubble away. So you just live in that. Just imagine just living in that. And then now also imagine that the US government has sanctions put on you as well. Let's go on.
It's a moment frozen in time. People across southern Turkey simply don't know how long they'll be living like this for. Some, like Muzayen, want to stay as close to home as they can. She's sleeping in a tent right outside her damaged house.
My valuable articles are in there. Thieves are roaming around. The police are barely keeping them away. Lots of thieves. How can I live here?
Sprawling tented camps are the new towns. Big promises have been made for a programme of permanent rebuilding, but it won't happen quickly.
You can't deal with devastation on a scale like this in days or even in weeks. The impact of this is going to be felt by people here in southern Turkey.
You see this? Look at all the rubble. Again, there's no way to clear this quickly. No way. That's terrible. That's right, Terry. What a tragedy. An absolute disaster. And it's not an uncommon tale. Like, that's the thing. When you look at some of these countries abroad, particularly where there's countries of brown people, let's just be real, brown people and black people, this is not unusual. And they have to live like this. But a lot of people don't focus on those countries, though. You know, a lot of people aren't focusing on countries like Syria, countries like Haiti, countries like Somalia, countries like Yemen. Everybody wants to talk about what's happening to the Ukrainians. And this is not to say we don't feel sympathy, but everyone wants to talk about what's happening to them. But all these other countries that have been being destroyed for years, nobody wants to talk about it. You don't even hear about it. Does mainstream media talk about the sanctions that people are suffering under in Syria? Did they talk about that? No. Do they talk about the fact that people in Afghanistan are also starving? Nope. And you need to ask why that is.
For years.
Anna Foster, BBC.
Well, Anna, as we can see, is there a month on? And Anna, just how and who is helping the people there, obviously in such desperate need?
Well, help came very quickly in terms of search and rescue missions. We saw teams from all over the world who flooded into southern Turkey and did what they can to try and find people who were still buried under the rubble for those first 2 weeks. Now things have really changed because, of course, so much time has passed that everybody who may still be under these collapsed buildings has sadly lost their lives. And it's about supporting those people who survived. Now, people you speak to are grateful for things like the tent and the food and the aid, the water, the medicines, but a lot of people will tell you that there is still not enough. This is an area of around about 13 million people stretching across southern Turkey, and they still need an awful lot more aid because, as we were saying there, who knows how long this could last for. The scale of the devastation is so extensive. The size of the population that needs support here is so big that it makes it very difficult to try and provide that huge level of aid that's needed on an ongoing basis.
Anna Foster, thank you very much.
That's right. I have a couple of former students that were from Turkey. I should reach out to them and see how they're doing. It's been a while. But this leads to another issue, which is recently it was recommended by the UN human rights expert urging the US government to lift the sanctions on Syria. I want to get into this article and then I want to explain to you how that vote went, because I don't think you're going to be happy about the results of that vote. But you see what people are living in and what they're having to deal with. But there's more. Lift suffocating unilateral sanctions against Syrians, urges UN human rights expert. So you can see here. Let me go ahead and make this. There we go. I am struck by the pervasiveness of the human rights and humanitarian impact of the unilateral Kesheev? Did I read that right? Yeah, unilateral, course of measures imposed on Syria and the total economic and financial isolation of a country whose people are struggling to rebuild a life with dignity. That's coming from Elena, who's a special reporter on the negative impact of the unilateral coercive measures of the enjoyment of human rights. Crippling sanctions. I actually need to make this bigger. I'm having a hard time seeing it. Okay. In a statement following her 12-day visit to the country, she presented detailed information on the catastrophic effects that sanctions are having on all aspects of life. Currently, 90% of Syria's population is living below the poverty line. She said this, pointing to their limited access to food, water, electricity, shelter, cooking, heating fuel, transportation, and healthcare. Now, everybody wants to talk about what people are missing right now in Ukraine and what they need help with. But I want to remind you, before this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, there was this situation with Syria. These people have been living like this for quite a while. And the United States government doesn't want to send any aid to help them, though. The United States government just voted to not lift the sanctions on Syria. These people are starving. These people have limited access to food, limited access to water, electricity, shelter, heating fuel, transportation, and healthcare. But you don't see the United States government shilling out billions of dollars to help them. Let's go on. Moreover, growing economic hardship threatens to trigger a massive brain drain in the country, with more than half of the vital infrastructure either completely destroyed or severely damaged. The imposition of unilateral sanctions on key economic sectors, including oil, gas, electricity, trade, construction, and engineering, have quashed national income and undermined efforts towards economic recovery and reconstruction. Human rights violations. At the same time, blocking bank payments and refusing deliveries by foreign producers, coupled with sanctions-induced limited foreign currency reserves, have caused serious shortages in medicine and specialized medical equipment, particularly to treat chronic and rare diseases. In other words, they are allowing these people to just die. If you're starving them, if they have limited access to medicine, to water, they are allowing these people to just die. And it's not just Syria. It's the other countries that I mentioned as well. And I want to point this out to you because I want to explain the hypocrisy with our government. Because they are really quick to jump up and say, we need to help aid these European countries. But when it comes to countries, and particularly, we're going to talk about this on Call In tonight, particularly countries where there are people that are brown or people that are black, U.S. doesn't want to give them any kind of help. The U.S. wants to put sanctions on those countries. But they'll steal their resources, though. Let's go on. And due to the unavailability of equipment and spare parts, Ms. Duhan warned that the rehabilitation and development of water distribution networks for drinking and irrigation has stalled, with serious implications for public health and food security. Now, this issue here with the water and public health, I want to explain what could happen here, which I know did happen in Haiti. We covered this probably like a month or so ago. Haiti saw an onset of cholera. Cholera was back in Haiti again because they had a lack of water. So when you have limited water, what does that affect, right? You need water to drink, but you also need water to clean yourself, to wash your hands. So if you don't have the water, then you're not able to wash your hands. And that leads to sanitation issues. And that's how cholera, a disease like cholera, can come back. So they have cholera again in Haiti. So not having enough water or sanitation, that can cause other diseases to happen. This is why I say they're allowing these people to die. Let's go on. In the current dramatic and still deteriorating humanitarian situation as 12 million Syrians grapple with food insecurity, I urge the immediate lifting of all unilateral sanctions that severely harm human rights and prevent any efforts for early recovery, rebuilding, and reconstruction. So here's the human rights issue here. And I want to highlight this because right now, the United States government, and last year too, they have made claims that China has made human rights violations. Even though that's been debunked by the State Department, but they've made those claims. But here you have proven human rights violations in Syria, and the United States government won't call it out because the United States government is complicit. They're a part of it. No reference to good objectives of unilateral sanctions justifies the violation of fundamental human rights. The international community has an obligation of solidarity and assistance to the Syrian people. But I've said this before, and I'll say this again. People don't care about brown people abroad. I'm cutting right to the chase with it. No need to gloss over it. It's a reality. And recently, this was noted in front of Rashida Tlaib. Now, Rashida Tlaib had an event here at the University of Michigan, and Jose and some of his comrades decided to confront Rashida Tlaib. Now, there's two parts to this. The first part, they confront her about the money that's sent to Ukraine. But the part that I want to highlight tonight is the confrontation that Rashida Tlaib has about not lifting the sanctions on Syria. Let's get into that.
Tlaib, I need to know, will you support Representative Gates' resolution to pull troops out of Syria? These wars are going to get us killed. We are forcing the Syrians into massive starvation. This is not something to ignore. The bill.
Look at this. So Rashida Tlaib just turns away from her, ignoring her, talking to this woman. I don't know who this woman is, but talking to this woman. She doesn't consider this to be important, what this woman is saying. Now, that's really interesting because this woman is pointing out that people in Syria are starving. These people are dying. You need to lift the sanctions on them. Rashida Tlaib has no interest in hearing this discussion. She has no interest in hearing this woman's conversation. But at the same time, Rashida Tlaib is known as the vocal one in Congress to speak out against these type of atrocities that are committed towards the Palestinian people. So you see how, and no shade to that, in the sense that, yes, we acknowledge and we do understand the way the Palestinian people are being treated is absolutely horrendous. Totally understand that. And I've talked about that and I still stand by that. But it's interesting to me how Rashida Tlaib, she can stand up and make those statements about the Palestinian people because it's her people. So if you can call out human rights violations towards the Palestinians, but you can sit here and you can ignore what is happening to people in Syria, what does that tell you about Rashida Tlaib? This is why, when people make these statements to me and they say that Rashida Tlaib, oh, she's the more gutsy one of the squad. She's the best squad member. She's more vocal. She knows her lane too. Let's just be real here. She'll speak up for her people. And you notice they all kind of do this in a sense, like AOC, she'll make sure she look out for her people. But she'll vote against legislation that helps other minority groups. We're calling it all out tonight. We're calling it all out because this is a problem. This same woman who has stood up multiple times and said we cannot ignore the way that the Palestinians are being treated. We cannot ignore the fact that the Israel state government is committing apartheid and they are pushing these people out. We cannot ignore it. But it's okay for you, Rashida Tlaib. It is okay for you right now to ignore what's happening to the Syrian people. That's your gotcha moment. We'll go on.
Is going to be voted on Wednesday. Why are people ignoring this? People are dying in your name. Representative.
None of these people care. None of these people care. You didn't say the magic word. You didn't say it's happened to Ukrainian people. You didn't say it's happening to people in Israel. You said the wrong word. You said Syria. And I'll go ahead and tell you another thing too. If she would have said Haiti, they would have ignored it as well.
You are my representative, Representative Tlaib. I demand an answer to this resolution. I'm going to call your office. I'm going to be at your office. We need to pull our troops out of Syria. We need to stop the sanctions on these wars. Oh my God.
I feel her frustration. I really, really feel it. It really makes me feel some kind of way. It's just, don't come with me with this. You care about brown people abroad. You care about the people that fit your interests, that help you continue to get reelected. That's what you care about. That's what this is really about. So you can come out looking like the good one because you can say, I'm the only one in Congress standing up for the Palestinian people. And you turn your back on the Syrian people. So what is that? That's Rashida Tlaib. And the woman talking to her, that's her constituent. I am absolutely disgusted and appalled that anybody right now can still sit here and carry water for these people. I cannot do it. I cannot do it. Palser says, I am Palestinian, Syrian, American. Syria and Palestine are one people in heart, and Rashida betrayed us. It's gross. I want people to see the hypocrisy. You cannot, at this point, you cannot sit here and pretend like she is some hero just because she calls out one atrocity, but she doesn't call out the other. Of course, she's going to stand up for her people. Don't even come at me with this. Don't even come at me. They all do it. They all do it. But they turn their back on the other groups. Wake up, people. Wake up. And I'll show you that they all do it. Here's the voting roster here. Let's do roll call. So this is the bill. House Resolution 132. Vote question on motion to suspend the rules and agree, responding to the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria on February 6, 2023. So you're going to see the yay and nay votes. It passed. Only 2 people voted against it. Only 2 people voted against it. So let's check. We're going to check for the squad. We should do this by There we go. All right. It's in alpha order, so let's just do it in alpha order. Who comes up first? Bush? Cori Bush. Yay. I just can't. I can't. Miss, I come from the Ferguson protests. You voted against lifting the sanctions on people in Syria. Make it make sense, people. You want to say, let's defund the police. Unarmed Black people being killed by the police. Totally agreeing with you on that. But you okay with these people being starved to death? Let's go on. Alpha order, who's next? Next should be, hell, I'm trying to remember all their last names now. We are going to, did we get Jamal Bowman? We didn't get him. I'm sorry. We're going to go back up. There he is. Jamal Bowman. Yay. Of course he would vote yay. Well, period is right there. Yay. Of course he would vote yay. Jamal Bowman is more concerned about starting a hip hop holiday than people starving in Syria. He's more concerned about that. Let's move on. We did Bush. We did Bowman. We'll have Tlaib. We'll have Presley. Omar. We got to go to the O's. Let me faster. In O. So they right next to each other. AOC. Yay. Ilhan Omar. Yay. Ilhan Omar. Originally from Somalia. The U.S. government issued drone strikes on your own people. And you raise your hand and you say, I wrote a letter to Joe Biden to tell him I disagree with this towards the Somalian people. This is my home country. Where's the letter, Ilhan, towards the people in Syria? Do you see it? Again, they protect their own. That's it. Let me go on. Then we go to the P's. So let's go to Presley. Here we go. Ayanna Presley. Yay. This is absolutely horrendous. Let's go to Rashida Tlaib. Tlaib. Oh, I passed. Sorry. Right here. Rashida Tlaib. Yay. So you see, I have to say this, and I apologize if I'm a little pissed. Because I got to say this, because the number of times I have seen this woman stand up and I have seen her say, we have to protect the Palestinian people. You're an actress. You want to protect your people, but you don't think other people who in dire situations abroad should be protected. You see, your votes do fucking matter. You can always pull up the roll call. This is why I tell you guys, you can always pull this up. This woman is a fraud. They're frauds. They're actresses. Don't buy anything that they say. Don't give them any of your money. And don't support them. Period. I don't know how much more I can stress that. I don't expect the Republicans, for the most part, to vote against it. I don't expect the Republicans to say, yes, let's lift the sanctions. I don't even expect these corporate Democrats who take money from the military-industrial complex. I don't expect them to do it. I don't expect the squad to do what they're supposed to do. But you know why this really upsets me is because there are a number of people who have not woken up, who still believe that they are the best we have. So let me make this very clear to you. If they are voting this way, They are not the best that we have. We have no best, damn it. Let's just be clear about it. There's no best. Stop it with the best. What we have are people who went into a system that became a part of that system. They have no problems voting along with Democrat leadership the way that they're told to vote. They have no problem doing this. They're not going to stand up for you. They're not going to stand up for me. They're in the system now, and this is a fucking joke. Don't come at me with, oh, but they're better than the Republicans. Are they if they're voting the same damn way? Look at how they voted. Look. If we go back up to the top. Look. 414 people voted yay. 414 people voted yay. So tell me, people, for the people who keep saying to me, they're better than the Republicans, how the hell are they better than the Republicans if they are voting along with the Republicans and they refuse to lift the sanctions on people in Syria who are starving, who are dying, who need water, who need food, and who need medicine? How are they better? So I don't need to hear, don't come at me with it. Don't come at me with, oh no, we might get Trump. Oh no, if you don't vote for AOC, then the Republicans gonna win. Don't come at me with that bullshit. Not today. While everyone, so many people was talking about on Saturday, talking about Marianne Williamson, when you had Shama Sawant launch worker strike back, and everybody talking about, oh, Marianne. Everyone's so busy talking about that. You were distracted about this. Most people don't even know about it. So many people talking about who's running for office, not talking about how these politicians are voting, though. We cannot allow ourselves to miss this type of information. We cannot allow ourselves to not pay attention. This is why I tell you it's very important to pay attention to the way that they vote. I don't care what they say. When they vote, it's on record. So nobody come at me. And Ayanna Pressley, I don't want to get no freaking text message from your campaign or anybody else in this area. Do not text me. Don't send me no damn emails. Stop asking me for money. Stop asking me to canvass for you. None of it. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. What a joke. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin hemp car. Kid lost leg at meat factory. One fell to death on the first day, open secret, sent to live with no family, gone missing. That's about the migrant child labor rise. Pick tobacco wearing black garbage bags on hot days. Honda Kia, 80-hour days, construction. We were talking about this recently about the children that were working in the meat packing plant too. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Speaking of earthquakes, did you know fracking causes earthquakes? Ever notice how they surged in Oklahoma ever since oil drilling went up? Yep. So they don't want to help the people in Syria, but they want to steal their resources, though. They want to occupy their oil. They're starving these people out. And you may think it's far away, but don't be surprised if they do it to us too. They're already kind of slowly doing that through processes called gentrification. And in this next story, there's another way that they're slowly doing that. You need to catch this story here about the SNAP benefits. Now, I don't know how many of you are affected by this, but we need to, what's that, Eric? You need to go on Jimmy Dore and amplify this vote by the squad. I can send that tweet to Jimmy. I think I'll send that tweet to Jimmy so he knows about it. Doesn't have to be me who says it, but so he knows about it. Speaking of them trying to starve us out, now this is an American issue. SNAP boosts kept millions out of poverty during COVID. Now they're gone. This is a big issue. Supplements to the program ended on March 1st without an off-ramp. People are scrambling to fill the gap. So there are food banks that are in action as well. While food prices remain stubbornly high due to inflation, a program expansion that has served as a life raft since the early days of the pandemic has ended, leaving people scrambling to fill the gap left behind. The program, which had increased benefits offered under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is called SNAP, helped millions avoid serious food insecurity despite pandemic-related job cuts, school closures, and other crises. SNAP boosts ended Wednesday as part of the government's wind down of the pandemic federal assistance programs, returning benefits close to levels seen near the start of the pandemic. At 6.4%, inflation is still high, affecting the most basic necessities. So this is what people have to understand. Decreasing SNAP benefits, first of all, in itself is ridiculous. That's not fair. But two, we are still under inflation. The grocery store prices are still high. So now they expect these families, some poor, some are working class, they expect them to be able to buy groceries with less SNAP benefits when they needed the extra SNAP benefits in the first place because of the pandemic. Let's remember, during the height of the pandemic, we weren't dealing with this inflation. So how do they expect these people to be able to live off of this, especially if they have kids? They don't care about poor people. They don't care about working class people, period. Let's go on. On a federal level, many pandemic-era emergency assistance programs have already expired, such as extended unemployment benefits, but other crucial programs, including the SNAP extension and a Medicaid expansion to ensure vulnerable people throughout the pandemic, have continued. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Some states had already closed the SNAP emergency allotment program, but until Wednesday, it was still operational in 32 states, as well as Washington, D.C., Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Biden administration agreed to give 2 months notice regarding the end of the federal pandemic-related programs. Let's talk about a 2 months notice. For those who are poor, for those who are working class, what in the hell is that going to do? You give me a 2 month notice. I'm already poor. You give me the 2 month notice. What am I supposed to do with that? What are they supposed to do with that, people? If they're already working 2 jobs, which a lot of them are, and you give them a 2 month notice, what's that supposed to do? Prompt them to get a 3rd job? Two months notice for you to go take out a payday loan, which are only in those poor communities, by the way. You don't see payday loans in the burbs. And that's what some of them are going to do. I've already spoken to people. That's what some of them are going to do. Go take out a payday loan so they can put groceries on the table. And then you end up paying back more than what you borrowed because those places are predatory lenders. That's also why they thrive in poor communities. 2 months notice. Let's go on. Congress ended the SNAP emergency allotments at the end of February as part of the budget bill passed in December. Now, I want to remind you, in December, Republicans did not have control of the House. So for anybody coming to me and saying, well, the Republicans have control of the House, this happened in December. This is when Democrats were still trying to get a bunch of things passed before Republicans took control of the House. That was a part of that. So they passed this budget bill where they can actually increase the military budget to over $800 billion. But once again, they are taking money from social programs to help poor people. They don't want to cut back against defense spending, but they can cut back against giving you money, putting money in your pocket so you can put food on the table. And that's regardless who's in office, by the way. That happens under a Democrat president and a Republican president. Don't we have a Democrat president right now? Didn't we have a Democrat-led House in December? Let's go on. Though other programs, including a commitment to continue a summer meal subsidy program for school children, will continue, vulnerable people, including the elderly and disabled, may not have that kind of additional support. And this brings up the disabled community. The people who can't work. Where are they supposed to get the extra money to continue to buy their groceries? Where are they supposed to get that money from? People say they can get a loan with no job. And what has been happening, and what I think is going to continue to happen, is people are going to start putting more items on their credit cards. So you see, it's a win for the credit card companies. And if it's a win for the credit card companies, it's a win for the banks. And that's what this all goes back to. The wins are not really for the people. Even when they try to present them in such a way and make you think that you're winning, the ultimate win in the end is for the banks. I know, Lee, groceries are up like 50%. I know. Doesn't matter who's in office. Food prices remain high, even if some costs like rent is coming down. Depending on where you live. It's not coming down here. Global inflation and other factors have pushed up the price of what were once low cost, nutrient-dense basics like eggs. So although other budgetary pressures will ease food prices, even for nutritious staples, will consume a large part of SNAP recipients' income. You know what the increase allowed some people to do? There are some people that live in towns that are called food deserts. A food desert is a place that doesn't have an actual grocery store, but they do have like a Walgreens, a Rite Aid. They have these convenience stores. And so what will happen is oftentimes people will get their groceries from those convenience stores, which usually doesn't consist of much healthy options. But when you give people more money for food, now they have the opportunity to, okay, maybe I can leave town, go to the nearest town that has a grocery store, and maybe I can buy some healthier options. Now, not so much, because we all know the cheapest food are foods that are processed foods. Junk food, TV dinners, things like that. And I want to touch on this piece here, and then I'm going to go to the video. In recent months, the SNAP supplements provided an additional $3 billion per month in assistance for recipient households, according to a February report from the Center for Budget Policy and Priorities. But the abrupt end to the benefits program means that states didn't have the time to help beneficiaries ensure they receive the maximum allowed benefit by properly documenting other expenses like housing and medical costs, or to help them figure out alternatives. I want you to see what this looks like in real time. And then I'll go to what Pramila Jayapal had to say about this. Here's a family that is on SNAP benefits. I want you to see how they're going to be affected by this.
Are we ready? Yeah!
Jessica Ramos is a single mom. Feeding her 6 kids has always been a struggle.
What do you think about when you go to bed at night?
If we're going to be okay for the next week.
Her family is among more than 42 million Americans who receive SNAP benefits, what used to be known as food stamps. During the pandemic, the government boosted those benefits. Jessica received an extra $300 a month.
They came in handy. They really did. The prices are going so high that we need them.
These benefits kept 4.2 million people out of poverty and reduced child poverty by 14%, according to
kept people out of poverty and reduced child poverty by 14%. So that bragging right that Rokana likes to state, that Pramila Jayapal likes to state about, we cut child poverty in half. None of that matters anymore. None of it. And I said back then, that's not a bragging right. You still have half of the child population that is still in poverty. Stop bragging. Doesn't matter anymore. So the poverty rate is going to increase again, which is already still high. And what are people going to do for food if they don't have enough money and these grocery store prices are high? That can increase theft. This is another example to show you how a lot of crime is poverty driven. Let's go on.
the Urban Institute. But this month marks the end for those expanded benefits because of a provision in last year's omnibus spending bill.
The scary part for the next month, how are we going to live? What's going to happen?
What are the sort of decisions you're going to have to make to keep feeding your kids?
That was so hard. Either pay a bill or go buy some groceries. That's
where you're at.
Yes.
This is the reality for a lot of people in this country. That's the thing that I think some people don't understand. Pay a bill or buy food. Do I keep the lights on or do I feed my kids?
Jessica is not alone. Food banks across the country are preparing for a rise in food insecurity.
We have people calling our organization every day looking for more food resources.
George Matisic is the executive director of Share Food Program, one of the largest food banks in Philadelphia. He says they've already seen a 70% increase in demand over the last year as food prices have skyrocketed.
For organizations like ours, that means having to work round the clock to make sure we're sourcing more food to serve more people.
The typical SNAP household will see monthly allotments drop by at least $95. For older Americans and big families like Jessica's, the difference will be hundreds of dollars.
The people in Washington who are making these decisions, what do you want them to understand about what life is like for you?
For them to put themselves in our shoes, that we really are struggling out here. So please just consider, think about the children, mostly the children.
Dasha Burns, NBC News, Philadelphia.
It's really sad
feeding her sick.
When she says for them to put themselves in our shoes because they don't. Because they don't have to. Because they're not in this situation. They get unlimited sick leave. They don't have to worry about paying for food for the most part. They're not in this situation. That's the sad part. That's the really sad part, that she's sitting there crying and she says, I want them to put themselves in our shoes. They're not going to. Now, Pramila Jayapal, she made a statement about this in reference to the SNAP benefits. Let's hear what she had to say.
If I can, switching for a moment, gears here about the pandemic era expansion of food assistance funding of SNAP benefits, which expired this week, something that was just so crucial and served as a lifeline during the pandemic. How dire is this situation? You're the chair of the Progressive Caucus. This is obviously something that you championed, and I think a lot of people, progressives on the left, championed.
This is dire. And I just want to make clear for anyone who's listening, SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is the money that gets food to people who are hungry. And what we saw during the pandemic is by extending SNAP benefits, by adding the child tax credit, we were able to cut poverty, child poverty, in half. And
what I tell you, they're always bragging about that. There's that bragging point. We cut child poverty in half. Pramila, weren't you sitting in the House when this budget bill passed in December? Weren't you sitting in the House?
And it made it clear, Eamon, that poverty is a policy choice. Hunger is a policy choice. We have the power to change it, and it's with very little money. I mean, we're talking about, just in my state of Washington, 500,000 people will lose $171 a month. Across the country, 32 million people are going to be pushed onto this hunger cliff. And we know that hunger is already so much worse than it was even pre-pandemic. So this is a horrific thing. Republicans, by the way, in the House are proposing cutting SNAP even further, supposedly to take care of the deficit, when we know that we could raise taxes, as President Biden has proposed, on the wealthiest billionaires and get in enormous amounts of money that would far outweigh anything we would get by cutting these essential benefits to families.
But Republicans want to cut it even further. But the Democrats cut it too. It's just, I don't know how to explain this anymore. I really don't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's red or blue. At the end of the day, it is top down, and that is what matters. These people keep their seats in DC by pleasing corporations and by answering to their donors. That's how they get to keep their seats. They don't get to keep their seats by helping the people. Such a mess. I can't with this woman.
Get your thoughts as well on this Texas lawsuit that could determine the fate of medication.
We'll come back to that another time. But this is something that people need to understand. Even when you look at someone like Pramila Jayapal, she's an actress. She knows the game. She's been there long enough to know. She's from Washington State. Washington State is one of the most expensive states in this country. Seattle's expensive. Now, you from Washington State, Pramila, you want to talk about helping the people. Where are you with Shama Sawant's worker strike back action? Where are you, Pramila? Did you come out over the weekend and support worker strike back? I know you didn't, because if you did, Nick would have said so, because Nick was there. Where are you with that? They repeatedly leave out important talking points. They continue to say, we can do so with very little money. Do so with a lot of money, Pramila. What would be the problem if you used a lot of money to help out the American people in reference to poverty? You have no problem sending a lot of money to Ukraine. But when it comes to the American people, oh, we can do so with just very little money. Now we got to cut down to limitations when it comes to our own people. When it comes to the poverty issue in this country, we got to make limitations when it comes to our people and what we need and what we need and what we want in this country. When it comes to food, when it comes to poverty, we have a limitation. But when it comes to you sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, there is no limitation. The talking point is we will fight till the last Ukrainian. The talking point is we'll continue to give money to them for as long as it's needed. But when it comes to us, we have limitations. Make it make sense. Somebody clip that if you want to. Make it make sense. Call it all out, people. Call it all out. It's right in front of your face. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then we'll get to the final story. Flash Flood says SNAP decrease when food prices are going crazy. Absolutely. I'm telling you, I really do believe, I'm not kidding. Do not be surprised if this is some ploy, some type of population decrease ploy that they're trying to do. I do not believe they really want to help poor and working class people. I don't believe that. They'll keep us around, keep you around as long as they need you. If they really wanted to help poor and working class people, everybody in this country would have health care. Stephen, the U.S. is also occupying a third of Syria, the third with the oil. Yep. JB, this is inhumane actions done by our government. Rick says sanctions kill, U.S. hegemony and imperialism kills. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. U.S. left a wide open lane for China to help Syria. And then they'll try to come after them for that. Thank you for the super chat, Yep X. Speaking of war, children in Vietnam are still being born with defects due to the amount of Agent Orange the U.S. dumped on Vietnam. Hashtag war crimes. Yep. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Oz. What's going on? Shout out to Allie for the super chat. They each pay lip service to different races of people, but do not follow up with actions. They are all POS. Enough with electoral politics. There you go. Thank you for the super chat, Rosie. That is just such gross, disrespectful behavior. Thank you for the super chat, Cryosynth. Rashida only cares about brown nose, if you know what I mean. Optimism says SNAP never intended to fully feed people. So many go hungry even when the program is fully funded. Also, many adults on SNAP have work requirements. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea. Temporary aid doesn't lift anyone out of poverty any more than an umbrella stops the rain. JB, many of us have to get loans with our disability benefits. Many of us can't get credit cards either. So we have to overdraft, get charged overdraft fees, which I've always said overdraft fees is, for me, is just another way for banks to make more money. The banks can cover that. They don't need to charge people overdraft fees. Husband says, by the way, when I worked at Dollar General, all my coworkers were on food stamps. Company didn't pay enough. One of the girls was homeless. I believe that. And Delthea says, no, these people didn't cut poverty. Don't say that. Getting a vacation doesn't mean you never have to work again. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sab, remember when I said that using the CBI process, we should take a look at every federal program, service, and agency and implement them at the state level as a way to fill the gap between what you get from the feds and what your cost of living expenses are, thus funding them by drawing from the surplus created from a public bank. This was exactly what I was talking about. Speaking of public bank, there's a gentleman coming on Friday to discuss the public bank in Philadelphia. So stay tuned for that. Okay, final story of the night. I won't yell at you anymore, although I think that warranted yelling. But final story of the night. Professor Richard Wolff and Aaron Mate had an interesting discussion about the media. So you guys know I've been talking a lot about censorship. I've covered the Twitter files, I think, pretty extensively with most of the release. I think so. I've covered it pretty extensively. And some people have asked me like, oh man, not Twitter files again. But the reason why I continue to talk about it is because censorship, I think, is so incredibly dangerous. And it's not just about Twitter. It can start with something like Twitter, and then it can spread to a state like Texas, where they are making laws against people trying to get an abortion through the internet. I'm going to talk about that on Thursday. Censorship can spread. Mainstream media doesn't endure the same type of censorship that we do in independent media. There's things they can talk about that I can't talk about on here. It's just the reality of the situation. But they also take cues from the State Department, which is also problematic. But it's a big issue. And it all goes back to the media. And so Professor Richard Wolff here, that's where he starts off this conversation right out of the gate. Let's talk about the problems with the media. Let's get into it.
All right. You're a critic of U.S. mass media, and I would like to sort of pick your brain, if I could, to tell us, to start with, what are the dominant themes of the mass media as you see them now that represent what you're focusing on, your critique of? And I wanted to start with the place of the U.S. in the world today. How would you characterize for us mass media treatment and what's wrong with it?
If you look at how the role of the U.S. in the world is covered in U.S. establishment media, I think a fundamental problem is that it's presumed that we have the right to be the rulers, and we have the right to tell other governments what to do, that we have the right to impose sanctions that are designed to cripple entire economies and make people.
Speaking of sanctions, what were we just talking about?
People suffer, and our motives in doing so aren't questioned. So we talk about wanting to spread democracy around the world, and I think it's taken for granted, if you read establishment media accounts, that not only do we have the right to do all these policies, but that our motives are pure. And I just don't accept that as a journalist. As a journalist, we're supposed to be skeptical of power, especially power within our own societies, because that's the power that we're responsible for. And I don't see U.S. media doing that.
This speaks to the issue we were just talking about with Syria in reference to the sanctions. This is the thing. Like I told you, most people I talk to outside of this space have no idea this is even happening. And then when you explain to them what's going on, it's just like, well, I'm sure the U.S. has their reasons. It's always interesting to me when people say that. Well, I'm sure they have their reasons. What reasons? Other than stealing resources, other than trying to cripple them, having these people starve to death. What other reasons? And for the ones who are tuning in to mainstream media, when they hear about these attacks abroad, most of them will defend the United States government because that's what they were taught to do. And mainstream media still tells them to do that. We're in the right, they're in the wrong. And not once do these people sit back and question, is it a little bit strange that they tell us that the U.S. is always in the right? Am I really supposed to believe that every other country is always the one that's bad? We never do anything wrong? You would think more people would ask that question, but they don't. So the media is a big problem.
Right, good. The next question about the same issue of mass media. The 20th century was full of the story of a great struggle between capitalism and socialism, often characterized as a great struggle between the United States and Russia or the Soviet Union then. Well, the Soviet Union is gone. Here we are again fighting Russia. What is it about the struggle between capitalism and socialism that the mass media keep saying, and what's the problem there?
The U.S. is a hegemonic power. It has hundreds of military bases around the world. As you've covered, its corporations control, a huge proportion of the world's wealth. And so when you're a hegemon, you need enemies constantly to justify your hegemony, your military bases, your interventions, all the money that is spent on war, on weapons of war. And so the Soviet Union played that purpose during the Cold War, and it was also used to justify undermining any alternative to the U.S.-led system. So, for example, even in countries like Vietnam or Nicaragua, where you had governments arising from the will of the population. The U.S. tried to destroy those societies by blaming the Soviet Union as being behind everything. And we're seeing a similar playbook today, that Russia is used as a boogeyman whenever the U.S. wants to try to control a country and destabilize it. And so that's the function that Russia plays in the current U.S. imagination.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for just a second. I have heard Russia demonized since I was a kid. There was this Rocky movie, I think it was Rocky 4, right? And I like the Rocky series, the earlier movies. The later ones are kind of, But Rocky 4, where Rocky had to face a Russian boxer. By the way, the guy who played, this is a whole totally off topic. The guy who played the boxer, I forget his name. Somebody in the chat will know. The guy who played the boxer in real life, that guy went to MIT. Yeah, he was going to be like a chemist or something like that. Anywho, Rocky had to square off with against a Russian boxer. And the whole theme throughout the movie was just like Russia bad, Russia cold. Even when Rocky went to Russia himself and he was training in Russia, he was training outside. Yes, Dolph Lundgren. He was training outside, and Dolph Lundgren, he was actually training inside like this gym, this high-tech gym. Rocky was training outside, like in the snow and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, even then it's like, they were depicting Russia as like this vacant, cold, snowy, fierce place. And I've seen that happen a lot of times in Hollywood. But that was when I was little. I saw those movies and I was just like, they give you these ideas of what Russia is supposed to be like and what the people there are supposed to be like, right? So this goes all the way back, and this happened before I was born as well. So there's always been this idea pushed out from Hollywood in the United States and from the mainstream media that Russia is not a safe space, so to speak. And if you see those images enough, you can believe it. So there's that.
I think it's going to be provocative for many people that the closest we've come to war, and even perhaps nuclear war with Russia, was not when it was a socialist country, whatever exactly that means. It's actually when it became capitalist, like us, that the war began to heat up and become a greater threat. It ought to make people wonder, as you quite rightly put it, what the reality was back then, whether it was we need an enemy or it was a genuine problem with socialism. And what about the militant labor movement? The last couple of years in this country have seen a kind of resurgence, reawakening, whatever you want to call it, of workers fighting for unions, making strikes, and so on. How do you see the mass media coping with, making sense of all of that?
I think there's been a class war going on for decades, as you cover better than anyone else. And I think unions are obviously a very big threat to that. Just recently, there were reports saying that union membership in the U.S. is at record lows, despite the individual gains at some places like Amazon and Starbucks. And I think a mass media that is controlled by the same corporations that have every interest in breaking worker power and keeping unions down has been pretty much on board with that agenda. You have some exceptions. You have some good reporters at corporate outlets that cover workers' issues seriously. But overall, I mean, just look at how much effort is made to propagandize us into being convinced that we need to spend our resources on war, funding billions of dollars for a proxy war in Ukraine. And
I want to chime in here for just a second about the labor movements and mass media. Mass media, they did cover Chris Small's efforts in unionizing the first Amazon warehouse. And I think the reason why they covered it is because it was the very first Amazon, and Amazon's such a huge company. It was the very first Amazon warehouse to actually form a union. So that was a huge story. Obviously, they weren't going to turn that away. But what I have seen since then is some of these other wins that have happened in reference to unionization. mass media, for the most part, is not covering it, or if they do cover it, like Fox Business, they'll cover it in a negative way. They'll say things like, do these employees really need to have a union? Don't they already get benefits? I mean, what more could those people want? They'll cover it in that way. I've seen those videos, right? So I think when Aaron talks about the fact that some of the people in mass media are tied to corporate interests, this is incredibly true. Nick pointed this out, I think it was a couple weeks ago, that the gentleman who was on the panel with Nina Turner, I said he looked like Hank from Breaking Bad. Nick pointed out that he has straight, direct corporate ties. You know, you look up some of these commentators that you see on mainstream media, and you can connect them right to like the military industrial complex. Like they have worked for Lockheed Martin, or they're connected to what's the other one? Shoot balls. I forget it. The think tanks. They're connected to the think tanks that are part of the military industrial complex. And then you understand why those people have those seats on those panels on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. So that is one thing I will say when it comes to mainstream media, regardless if it's CNN or if it's Fox News, they're both corporate conglomerates, and they're both controlled by the military industrial complex and the State Department. So that's important for people to understand. That's why certain people you will never see on there. This is why CNN won't bring certain people on. This is why MSNBC won't bring certain people on, because of those reasons, because they know what you're going to say. They don't want you to come on there and start saying bad things about the military industrial complex. They don't want you to come on there and tell people that BlackRock owns like almost everything in the world. They don't want you to do that. Those are their investors.
One outcome of all these foreign adventures is that the argument is made that we don't have the money to take care of our people at home. So we still don't have health care, even as we're authorizing just endless blank checks for foreign adventures like the current proxy war in Ukraine.
Tell me, where is independent media? You're in the thick of it. You participate. You're part of it. Is it working? Is it reaching an audience? Is it performing the function you yourself have described is its purpose?
I think recent years have been very exciting for independent media. After years of being lied to, I think more and more people are done with establishment media outlets. The Iraq War, which so many major outlets bought into, and we've all know, just no one doubts anymore that that was based on lies. And the media failed to do its job in pushing back on those lies, and in fact became stenographers for those lies. And you can take that to virtually every other war. Russiagate was a major fixation of the US media, where we were told endlessly that Trump was installed by Vladimir Putin and that he was a Russian agent being blackmailed with secret tapes. And that has all collapsed as well. And eventually, after so many humiliations and failures, people start to get fed up. And I think in recent years, we've seen an explosion in independent voices and people craving perspectives that are outside of the constraints of the establishment. And so I think it's a very good time to be in independent media, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
That's right. And I think that we need more people, like more voices in independent media. You know, I know it can be somewhat competitive, which is really, that's still weird to me, but it can be somewhat competitive. Some people don't want to share time slots with people. It's just weird shit. Like no one owns a time slot, like things like that. Like it can have those issues with it. But I think that the more voices, the better, because the more people, then the more voices, the more people, the more voices, and the more people that you'll be able to reach. And I think that, yes, we do have to deal with the suppression that's on YouTube. That's just a given. It is what it is. People are more heavily suppressed now than they were 3-4 years ago on YouTube and independent media. But I will say that I hope that you learn something from me. Like I know when I watch independent media, I was learning things. I was learning things that mainstream media was not telling me. And that was very appealing to me. So I hope that when you watch me, I hope you're learning things as well, because I agree. I think that more people are kind of turning away from mainstream media in a sense, not as much as I would like, but I do think some of them are, because at least the numbers show that. In reference to CNN, like their ratings are steadily steadily declining, even though they've made some different management decisions. The ratings are still a problem with CNN. So it is what it is. But I think that says something. I think more people are starting to question the mainstream media narrative, and that's how they find people like us, right?
I would say the same thing for us. We are amazed at our growth. We've been here now for 10 years, and we never dreamed we'd have the size of audience that we now have, our ability to function and to grow. It's extraordinary. I kind of pinch myself a little bit every so often to make sure that this isn't a fantasy of mine. What about the reaction of the corporate media? What about the reaction of the mainstream? They must be seeing this too. Do you have a sense, do you experience an effort to silence, to marginalize, to exclude the kind of media you're talking about?
I think there's an effort to basically pretend that independent voices who don't drink the Kool-Aid just don't exist. And I experienced this throughout Russiagate, where you had this dynamic where every single day you'd have some new development, and that would lead the establishment media to declare that Trump is finished. They're going to find the smoking gun of collusion. And I took the trouble of actually reading the available evidence and showing that what was there was not what was being claimed. And throughout that period, I was just ignored. I was insulted by, some people in the establishment media, but my claims were never actually weighed, and there was never any attempt at serious intellectual debate, which is what should happen in any minimally honest journalistic culture. You have people with different perspectives and you have a debate. Well, when someone dissents from the prevailing orthodoxy, the answer is to ignore them, to try to censor them, or to dismiss them. In the case of, covering the issue of Russia critically, that gets you dismissed as being an agent of Vladimir Putin or something like that. But I think most people who aren't, card-carrying McCarthyites can see through that.
Tell me.
Even calling for peace, even people that call for peace now, they smear us. They call us like those types of names. It's really weird. Like some people are so brainwashed, man. Oh, man.
Do you think it's a reasonable parallel the way that the Ukraine issue is being covered now?
Do I think it's an interesting parallel in terms of voices being silenced?
Yes, and in terms of your experience with Russiagate and the work is there another Aaron Mate probably working in the wings somewhere around this Ukraine issue who is going to replicate kind of what happened to you?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to replicate what happened to me because I'm also trying with Russiagate, because I'm also trying to offer factual coverage of the Ukraine proxy war, which I think is the most dangerous issue in the world. And I think it's actually the outgrowth of the very dynamics of Russiagate, because part of the problem with Russiagate, and as I was warning about pretty tirelessly for a long time, is that it was normalizing this culture inside liberal politics in the US that we should be stoking war with Russia, that we should be looking down on diplomacy with Russia, that in accusing Russia of brainwashing millions of Americans into voting for into voting for Donald Trump and not voting for Hillary, that was pushing an agenda that treats Russia as this nefarious power that we can't negotiate with. And that's very dangerous when you're talking about the world's other top nuclear power. And so I think you can draw a direct line between Russiagate and the Ukraine war. And I've been trying to point out some of the many facts that get overlooked in discussions of the Ukraine war. The fact that the war, as horrible as it is, it didn't begin when Russia invaded. There's been a war going on in Ukraine since 2014, when there was a US-backed coup that overthrew the government of Viktor Yanukovych, and that set off a civil war inside Ukraine in which rebels backed by Russia rose up against the new coup government, and the coup government was backed by the US. And rather than pursuing peace and respecting a peace deal that was reached in 2015 under something called the Minsk Accords, the US has basically sided with Ukraine's far right in undermining peace and undermining any prospect of peace inside Ukraine, and I think put us on this path. And that coincides with a U.S. record of trying to bring Ukraine into NATO, which U.S. officials have long warned internally would be a very dangerous step, and also building up advanced weaponry on Russia's borders. So, for example, tearing up arms control treaties so that the U.S. can install missile sites in Poland and Romania. And all these issues are in the background of Russia's war in Ukraine, and they're just not discussed. And by not discussing them, we foreclose any possibility of diplomacy, because for diplomacy to happen, these issues have to be addressed.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, this is one of the things we've discussed multiple times on the show is there's no profit in peace. The profit is in war, economic profit. And that's a big part of the problem. Even if that means that you're going to destroy another country, like the US government doesn't care. There's over 700 bases, US bases in the world. Why? I think we're going to finish up here.
It's almost as though you have in Washington people with what the French would call an idée fixe, a fixed idea of how the world works, and they're going to pursue their aggressive agenda without any regard for the fact that the world is changing all the time. And if you ignore all of that, you're going to be running a policy that takes you right into a stone wall. I watched the competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China with a mentality, whether the Trump administration's trade wars and tariff wars or the Biden administration's basically continuing it for lack of a knowledge of what to do. It never works. The gap between Russia and China, between China and the United States keeps narrowing. The Chinese outmaneuver us at every turn. The question isn't asked what's going on. It's a continual kind of hostility. If we keep the Seventh Fleet in the South China Sea, somehow we're going to fix all of this. It's bizarre. I wish we had much more time. I have more questions for you.
Yeah, because these interviews are usually only like 15 to 20 minutes. But if you do want to see the full video, because this is part 2 of that episode, part 1 actually talks about like, how did they, oh, I see what they did. Anywho, part 1 of the episode is when he goes over more like the economic update that he usually does, but it's called Economic Update, Establishment Media in Russia with Aaron Mate. So that is actually, I believe it's the most recent video. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the full video, definitely check that out. Yeah, so that's that. We are going to do call in. I think I'm going to take just a quick break. And then I'll come back and we will head on over to call in. I think there's a lot to discuss here. Okay. And tomorrow is my birthday. Don't tell people. I told you, but don't go telling other people. Okay. Don't go tell other people. Tomorrow is my birthday. So I will be completely unplugging from socials, all of that jazz. I'll probably post on Twitter, happy birthday to me with a picture or something. And then I'm peacing out. So you will not hear from me at all tomorrow. But yeah, keep that on the shh. Don't tell people. Don't tell people. All right, Eric, I'm ready whenever you are. I'll be back, guys.
So it's like your super secret birthday. Okay. Don't tell nobody. All right. How's everybody doing on this Tuesday night? This is where we give Sabby a little break while we get ready to jump into the call-in. To do the call-in thing, you can either hit the link and do it in your browser, or you can install the call-in app on your smartphone. I'm going to put in the link to tonight's call-in episode. Let me see if I can bring that up to show you all what we're going to be talking about tonight. A couple of clicks away here. And on call-ins where we want to hear from you and what you got to think. Here we go. I'll bring it up here. And we're going to be talking about the sanctions backed by the squad and their voting. We saw that roll call vote where every single member of Congress but 2 voted for that. And you can talk about any topic you want, especially other topics that are in the show. But that'll be coming up shortly after we give Sabby a little break. Tomorrow, super secret Sabby birthday. Don't tell nobody. But yeah, they voted for this bill that came through. I was actually looking at the text of the bill, and it's this kind of usual sleazy kind of Congress thing where the bill was like, oh, well, we're sending aid over to Turkey and Syria, and but then it gets into how bad Assad and the Syrian government is. There's a quote from Ned Price in the text of the bill talking about how bad Syria is, and it's so it is a pretty straight shot to saying that any member of Congress that's voting for this bill is supporting the sanctions regime against Syria. And as someone in the chat put, sanctions are siege warfare. All right, let's see. We got a few chats and comments around here. Let's see what we can throw up. Yeah, from a gamer saying Aaron is one of the best journalists out there. Definitely true that from gamer. Good to see you as usual. JB Font hanging in the chat saying Sabby, that guy was a lobbyist for Norfolk Southern, talking about an earlier clip. And also from Mr. JB Font saying we definitely need more voices, more women, black and brown people, and queer people in these spaces. Yeah, in intimate media spaces, and of course all media spaces. And we need voices like JB, Sabby, and RBN that are not bought and just corporatized. I know this was interesting from Sula Moon with the awesome cat avatar pic saying I used to call myself a bleeding heart liberal until someone said I wasn't, and to look up what liberal actually meant, and that's when I started researching everything else. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We could have a topic of that as a topic of discussion sometime, of like what were our awakening moments and the things that kind of changed our thinking from believing what's on the TV and the media, and versus starting to question, and you kind of hit this point where like it's all BS. And well, I think one of the big moments, one of the big things in that was of course the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction lie that lied us into a war. And you would think at this point that no one should believe anything coming out of the government after that, but people do. But I think we should probably reference it more in saying, kind of in a post-Iraq WMD world, how can you believe it when the government is saying, oh, this is what we have to do and this is that. And yeah, from all the same, ooh, it's all BS. Mm-hmm. And let's see here on the Rock Fins, from the one and only Mr. Roger Meadows, who will probably hear in a few minutes in the call-in. And by the way, I'll just say it again, this is when we give Sabby a little break, and then she'll be back on and we jump into call-in. Roger, thanks for the tipped comment on the Rock Fins. Oh, please, Sab, you missed the 80s Michael J. Fox character Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties. He was a 1980s Republican. All he talked about was Reagan and Nixon. I will never forget the episode where his hippie dad asked him, if you had to pick between Reagan or Nixon, who would you choose? Alex nearly had an aneurysm. Or that Kevin Costner movie No Way Out, or G.I. Joe, when they fought the October Guard, it was all over. I think Roger's talking about these movies with the Russians and other things.
Oh, yes. Okay, so Alex P. Keaton, there was a show called Family Ties.
Family Ties.
And he was a big Reagan fan. And oh, man, I remember. You can probably watch that on, there's a channel that still shows all those older shows. I forget, my mom watched it, TV Land or something like that. I think my mom watches that channel. But yeah, you can catch some of those older shows.
All right, we'll see you in the call-in.
Yeah. Skadoodles. All right, we're heading on over to call in. This is episode 87, Syria sanctions backed by the Squad. The Squad, along with corporate Democrats, have voted to not lift sanctions on Syria after a devastating earthquake. Does economic sanctions matter for those who claim to be anti-war? Does anyone care about brown people abroad? Let's dive into it tonight. Also, we usually talk about other segments that we covered on the show as well. The call-in link is pinned to the top of the chat, so let's head on over theirs. All right, guys, you know how we do this. Tomorrow is my birthday. My birthday. My teacher used to play this song by the Beatles called the birthday song by the Beatles. They say it's your birthday. Da-na-na-na-na-na. It's my birthday too. Yeah. And happy birthday, Terry Hinton. I saw it's your birthday tomorrow too. We're both Pisces. Represent Pisces in the house. All right, guys. We'll head on over to call in. Links pinned to the top of the chat. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.